Imagine you're 9 months pregnant. There's no hospital, no doctor, no painkillers, no clean water. If something goes wrong, and something usually does, there is nobody coming to save you. The nearest help is a woman who has done this maybe 4 times herself, and half of those babies didn't make it. This was childbirth for almost every woman who ever lived, and the way they survived it is more clever, more brutal, and more organized than anything you were taught in school. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you where ancient women actually gave birth, and it wasn't lying down. The tools they used, including one made from a shark's tooth, the reason men were forbidden from watching, and the single most dangerous moment of the entire process, which wasn't the birth itself. This is the half of history nobody bothered to write down. Let's get into it. First thing to understand, in almost every ancient culture, childbirth didn't happen in the home. It happened somewhere else. A separate hut, a cave, a specific tree, a designated field. Why? 2 reasons, and they're both fascinating. The first is practical. Childbirth was bloody, really bloody. And in most ancient cultures, blood from birth was considered spiritually dangerous. Not evil, just powerful. Too powerful to mix with daily village life. So they built it its own space. The second reason is the one nobody tells you. That separate hut wasn't isolation. It was a women-only zone where the rules of normal society stopped applying. No husbands, no fathers, no male elders. For some women, it was the only time in their entire lives they got to exist in a space where men literally were not allowed to enter. Some anthropologists who studied surviving traditional cultures reported that women would actually look forward to the birthing hut. Not the birth, the hut, because of who got to be in it with them. Now here's where modern medicine actually has to admit ancient women were right. Ancient women did not give birth lying on their backs, almost nowhere. Across Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Americas, Africa, Asia, the position was almost always the same, squatting, kneeling, or standing. Egyptian women gave birth on 2 large bricks, one under each foot. Greek women used a special chair with a hole cut in the seat. Many cultures used a rope tied to a ceiling beam. The woman would grip it and pull down against her own body weight. Why does this matter? Because gravity helps. The position modern Western hospitals used for the last 100 years, flat on your back, feet in stirrups, is actually one of the worst positions for the human body to give birth in. It exists because it's convenient for the doctor, not the mother. Ancient women figured this out around 40,000 years before we did, and we're only now circling back to it. Every village had her, sometimes called the wise woman, sometimes the grandmother, sometimes she had no title at all. She was just the woman you called. She was the closest thing the ancient world had to a doctor. And in many cultures, she knew more about the human body than any man would for the next 3,000 years. Her bag, and we have archaeological evidence of these bags, would contain some combination of dried herbs for pain, sharp tools for cutting, a polished stone or shell for catching the baby, and a small carved figure representing whatever goddess the culture prayed to for safe birth. In ancient Egypt, the midwife was so important that her profession had its own hieroglyph. In Rome, midwives could become wealthy and famous. The most respected one we know of, a woman named Salpe, wrote medical texts that male doctors quoted for centuries without ever crediting her. This woman, the midwife, is probably the single most important person in human history that nobody talks about. Every person reading this exists because, at some point, in some generation, one of these women saved one of your ancestors. Okay, let's talk about the tools, because some of these are wild. The umbilical cord had to be cut. Today we use sterilized surgical scissors. Ancient women used whatever was available, and they were specific about it. In parts of Polynesia, a shark's tooth, sharp, naturally serrated, and considered spiritually appropriate because the shark was a guardian animal. In parts of Africa, a freshly split piece of bamboo. The split edge was sharper than most metal blades, and, they didn't know this, but we do, naturally antibacterial. In ancient Egypt, a piece of obsidian. Volcanic glass. Obsidian blades, by the way, can be sharpened to an edge thinner than surgical steel. They're still used in some experimental modern surgeries today. And in some Native American cultures, the umbilical cord wasn't cut at all for a specific reason. The cord and placenta were buried under a tree, and that tree became the child's tree for their entire life. If you visited a village and saw a young person hugging a specific tree, that's why. We have 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom about how to bring a human into the world, and most of it got thrown out the second male doctors took over the field in the 1700s. We are still rediscovering things ancient midwives knew. I told you at the start there was a single most dangerous moment in ancient childbirth, and it wasn't the birth itself. It was the 3 days after. Most ancient women who died from childbirth-related causes didn't die during the delivery. They died from infection in the days that followed, something called childbed fever, or puerperal fever, where bacteria entered the uterus during or after birth and turned septic. The ancient world didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about germs, but they noticed patterns, and many cultures developed practices that, by accident, were exactly right. The birthing hut was burned down or ritually cleaned after every birth. The mother was washed in specific herbs we now know have antimicrobial properties: yarrow, sage, certain tree barks. She wasn't allowed to be touched by anyone except the midwife for a specific number of days, which varied by culture, but was usually somewhere between 3 and 10. They didn't know why these rules worked, but the women who followed them lived, and the cultures that didn't have these rules, their mothers died at horrifying rates. Here's the part that should make you angry. When European male doctors took over childbirth in the 1700s and 1800s, they threw out all of this. They went from autopsying dead bodies straight to delivering babies without washing their hands. The death rate from childbed fever in hospitals became higher than the death rate had been in the ancient world. It took until 1847 for one doctor, Ignaz Semmelweis, to figure out that washing your hands between patients saved lives. He was mocked, fired, and eventually died in an asylum. Ancient midwives had been quietly doing the equivalent for 10,000 years. Here's what I want you to sit with for a second. Every single person alive today is descended from a woman who survived this. Not one. All of them. Your mother, her mother's mother, going back 1,000 generations. Every single woman in that chain went through some version of what we just talked about and survived it. In a world without anesthesia, without antibiotics, without ultrasounds, without anyone who could legally be called a doctor. The reason you exist is because somewhere in that chain, a tired older woman with a bag of herbs and a sharpened shell knew what she was doing. We never wrote their names down. We never built statues for them. Most of them couldn't read or write, so they couldn't even record themselves. But they are the reason any of us are here. That's the half of history nobody bothered to write down. And I'm going to keep telling it. If you want to know what happened to those women when their periods came, which, by the way, involved an entire separate hut and rules you won't believe, that's the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm telling the stories nobody wrote down. See you in the next one.